So welcome everyone. I really did almost write a bad word in my email subject today, getting ready for this class on spirituality and healing, because over the last few years, I have heard more stories than I could have believed I would hear, including another one in just the last week, about incredible kinds of spiritual abuse and predation happening within communities that are supposed to be about healing, and often that are joining healing and spirituality together in many ways. And I know there have been very high profile scandals, the scandal in the Catholic Church, and periodically other, religious sects or cults, or, here and there, these things come up. And we know that there's a real potential for abuse of power in situations like this. And yet, whenever I see it happen, I think especially when I see it happen within sort of the complementary medicine world, it makes me so upset. And it also makes me upset when I see not just that kind of explicit abuse and exploitation of people, which is far more rampant than I would have believed, but it also really upsets me when I see this trend of spirituality being sort of bought and sold like a cool accessory that you could try on, or that everybody's gotta have, I don't know, the cool spiritual looking, I don't even know, or books that are supposed to be about spirituality, but really they're just oh, here are a bunch of ways to get everything that you want to happen to you. And we're gonna pretend that this is what spirituality is about. I am not going to go on an hour-long rant about these things, but that's very much where I'm coming from. Is I think there's some parts of the conversation that are missing, and they're still happening. Sorry, Charlotte's trying to jump on the couch. I'm going to push her off for 1 second. Nope. Sorry, no, you're not coming on the couch. Thank you. Good girl. Okay, sorry guys. Oh, she just jumped on the couch anyway. All right, well, dog mom is going to have to give up for right now, because I have to teach you guys, and I can't discipline her for an hour. Okay, so what was I saying? I totally lost my train of thought. Oh, so I'm not going to just rant negatively about all of these things that bother me. I'm instead going to focus on part of what I think is really missing, what's needed, what we should be talking about when we talk about spirituality and healing. And I want to offer this hopefully with as much truth and integrity as I can, because I am not a spiritual teacher. That is not the nature of my work, that I am in no way qualified to advise you on your soul and your spiritual life. What I want to do is look at this from the perspective of healing, and the perspective of, if we are approaching healing in a truly holistic way, we have to include spirituality in some sense. So that's what we're up to. And my firm belief is that all of the world's genuine spiritual traditions will have a way of approaching this topic that we are speaking on today. And if I use examples, or I speak about the Chinese tradition, or this, or these sorts of things, I am not suggesting that you need to abandon the tradition that you are practicing or that you were raised in. I think that it's more like a question of how might you look for or find support for this kind of approach within your own tradition. So that's the spirit in which I'm going to offer this today. So, okay. So the first thing that we have to ask, if you think about spirituality and healing, does it seem to you like, how does it seem to you if you think about this from the perspective of like, what are the spiritual practices and things I need to do and say and believe and think and feel in my heart in order just for me to heal? Is it just me, or does it feel to you like somehow there is something broken in an approach to spirituality and healing that is focused entirely on just this physical body, just this mind, just this isolated being? What happens if you contrast that to an approach to thinking about or practicing spirituality and healing that acknowledges that there's always a mystery at the center of these things? There aren't any easy answers. And that we are all connected. And that we are not going to approach these practices with the perspective of like a quid pro quo with the universe or God or a higher self. That we're not going to try to be good so that nothing bad ever happens to us. What do you think about that? What do you think about broadening the relationship between spirituality and healing so that it's not just about doing all the right things so that you will earn the healing that you want through spiritual means? What do you guys think about that? Michelle says, spirituality as preventative medicine. Yes, actually. That is very much something that I'm going to get to. Yes. And I think, Michelle, where I would yes and you is that when we are practicing spirituality as a form of preventative medicine and as a healing practice, what we are talking about is not just preventing our own body or mind or heart from getting sick, but we are preventing any number of bad consequences or any amount of pain or suffering or any number of things, not just from ourselves, but from those that we're connected to. So it's not just about me. Kayla says, I think it's a more honest and realistic approach. It prepares us for the challenges we all face. Amanda says, I'm checking in and doing some other tasks while you ask these deep questions. Wait, so what are you asking exactly? Yeah, thank you, Amanda. This is one of my challenges is sometimes I sort of just keep expanding on things and it makes the question less than clear. So I think I want you to compare and contrast what comes up for you if you think about spirituality and healing as some form of metaphysical tit for tat. Like, if I do these things, if I say these prayers in the right way, or I do this ritual, or I believe these things, or if I have a pure heart, or whatever the spiritual act is, then maybe the universe or God or whatever will bestow healing upon me. And it's like a trade. If you compare and contrast that approach to an approach that says, you know what? Both healing and the spiritual realm are such big things, and I am so small. And it's going to remain a mystery to me. So I don't know for sure how my spiritual practice will affect my own personal health. I don't know exactly. And I don't think it's going to be a tit for tat relationship. But I'm going to offer these practices. I'm going to offer the best of myself. I'm going to strive to be the best person that I can be, not because I want to try to trade my good behavior for healing gifts from beyond, but because I want to offer it as a gift instead to others, to the world, to myself, to being. So maybe it's like, what if we flip it from a selfish approach to a generous approach? Okay. Helen says, when you describe the first one, I see that as spirituality through a capitalist lens, putting something in to get something out, thinking about what we as individuals want to obtain. Yes, I think that it's very much kind of based in trade, or, like it has that almost economic feeling to it. Amanda says, I think my spirituality has always included the larger network, biome, etc., but more so now in this current environment, healing is paramount in spirituality. Plus, for me, magic and prayer and conversation with the universe, God, trees, those on the other side of the veil, changes with my own personal health, ebbs and flows. Yes, not tit for tat or trade. Yes, offer to outer purpose. Yes. Okay, thank you for your question, Amanda. You helped me to really crystallize what I was saying. Okay, so I want to think about what is. So it sounds like we have some basic ground of agreement here on this, but spirituality is really here for us. It's here in the hard times. That's when, ideally, we always have a feeling of connectedness. We always have a meaningful spiritual practice. We always are striving to be the best people that we can be, etc. However, when we really cry out, when we really feel that sense of need and longing, tends to be during the really hard times. So I want to just leave this question to dangle. During the really hard times, what are the spiritual practices that truly sustain you? That really, truly sustain you? And what I want to offer today are some thoughts about practices and behaviors that you can do during the medium to normal times that will set you up to have more resources to draw on when things get hard. And for those of you who back in the day did the Nimble Heart, Unwavering Soul class in either any of the iterations, A lot of that work that we did on emotional resilience, those characteristics of resilient people, there are some real resonances here with that work. And I think part of what gives me some confidence about what I'm going to put forward today is that threads of those things that we did and that we worked through and that we practiced during Nimble Heart really did, over time, build my capacity such that when I went through very difficult things recently, things that were far more difficult than other things I had gone through previous in my life that really took me down, I was sustained by those things that I had built up and cultivated. So I do have some conviction in this. So some of this is going to be a little bit challenging. I expect this to be challenging in certain ways, but I want to remind us that challenge is really how we grow and how we get better. You know, when children or animals play, a lot of times the nature of the play is like they do one thing, like you're going to jump like from the couch to the ottoman or something. You're not supposed to be jumping on any of it. And like the kid will like jump from the couch to the ottoman and like laugh and be really happy and like make it. And then the next time, move it just a little bit further and then do it again. So similarly, if you feel that there's a challenge offered to you here, then I want you to calibrate that challenge for yourself and how you decide to implement these things, or if you decide to. And I want you to make it so that it's just enough of a jump to make it maybe fun, to make it maybe just to stretch you a little bit, but not to take it to a place where, you know, you feel, oh, I've moved the ottoman all the way across the room. Like there wouldn't be any sense in striving for something that you felt sure you couldn't do. So we want to find the right amount of challenge. It's very critical. So we're going to turn to the topic that I think is all too neglected in the discussions of spirituality that I am hearing in my circles. Now, I have no doubt that there are plenty of circles where this conversation is happening, though probably in a different way than I'm going to offer it to us. So you may be part of a spiritual community where there is a lot of nuanced discussion about cultivating virtue or about practicing virtue. And if that's the case, I absolutely welcome your thoughts and suggestions and offerings here in the chat to come from a tradition that really is emphasizing these things. In the circles in which I am immersed and in which I believe many of my listeners are immersed, it's not something that we talk about. So in the Chinese tradition, before you become a physician or a healer, you know, the training classically for a long time, like 10 years or a very, very, very long time, was on all of this other stuff that was not directly about learning where are the meridians of the body, what are the herbs used for, how do we diagnose a person. It wasn't anything like that. The beginning of the training was all about cultivating the healer's own ability to observe deeply the heavens and the earth and to work with their own heart and mind and spirit to become the most developed person that they could be. And it was through this cultivation of virtue, this cultivation of intuition and connection, that was the thing that conferred the best chance of becoming a proficient healer on somebody. It was not the specific knowledge such as is now taught in acupuncture school or herb school or medical school. That comes later. So whether or not you see yourself as a person who's doing healing work, what I believe to be true is that the more cultivated you are, the more virtuous you are, the more impeccable with your word you are, you will have the greatest chance that healing will come through you into the world. And that healing, we don't know where the benefit of that will land. You know, when I'm working with a client, I cannot control whether or not that person gets better. All that I can do, and in fact what it is my sacred duty to do, is to give every ounce of effort and attention that I have to understanding what's going on with them, to offering the remedies that I believe will help, and using every resource at my disposal to come to those conclusions. And I also believe it is my duty to be a conduit for love, you know, to my people. And it looks different. You know, each of my relationships with my clients is very different, you know, very, very different. But even the people with whom I am the most have the most professional distance and all of that, in my heart, I am holding love for that person. That's part of that's part of it. And when you go to the grocery store, when you talk on the phone to the customer service person, your being is affecting and touching them just as much as my being is affecting and touching a client or, you know, a family member or something like that. So this cultivation is absolutely central to how much bandwidth is there in the world for healing to come in and be shared. So especially if you are moving toward a healing profession, especially because you're going to be uniquely challenged at this. But for all of us, this is what the teachers of my teachers would say is the most important thing for us to do. And cultivating virtue is not easy. There's a reason it's not that fashionable, and nobody is like having New York Times best-selling book launches in their little skinny jeans and their like perfect hair, talking about like the hip spirituality of virtue. Like, there's a reason for that. It's not like fun or magical, or like you don't get like cool props, and it doesn't have anything to do with the moon cycle. Like, none of that is really a part of this. This is really very much like tilling the soil, pulling up the weeds, brushing your teeth at night. It's daily kind of dedicated work. So that is where some of the challenge can come in. But the thing about it is that nobody can take it away from you. And you can start exactly where you are today. You don't need any special knowledge or props or anything. It is absolutely the one thing that I know you can do to make the world a better place, which is very important in a time when many people are feeling concerned about the state of the world and simultaneously unsure about how much power they have to change anything. And this is this is a union of self-love, compassion, and discipline that I often see missing. It seems so much like there are people for whom the discipline is really easy. And then there are other people for whom the compassion is easy. And getting the discipline and the compassion to hold hands or to dissolve into like divine union, that is the real challenge. And practicing virtue is a place where you can really hone that relationship between discipline and compassion. Okay. So before we get into some step-by-steps of sort of how to start doing this, how to think about it, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your uncensored thoughts about focusing on cultivating virtue within yourself as my offering of a remedy to what I see that's poisonous in the way spirituality and healing is often being talked about right now. Please tell me what you think and feel. I'm going to see if I can fish my computer charger out from underneath Charlotte, who is now cuddling me quite ferociously. Okay. So I'm just waiting. I think I have a feeling that you guys have some responses, so I don't want to dash ahead. Helen says, I'm wondering if you could define virtue for us. The most common place I've seen that word used in the past has been with sexual virtue in relation to abstinence. This brings up a very good point. I think one of the reasons that this conversation and these practices are missing in the circles in which I run is because certain religious sects have sort of cornered the market on the word virtue and cornered placed it into this very narrow bin. And so, Helen, I think that's a really excellent observation. So my sense of the most useful definition, and this I read somewhere in my research, and I won't be able to credit it properly, is that virtue is a habit of mind and heart that predisposes us to do the right thing. So what I like about that definition is that it's almost like when you practice any habit and then it gets easier and easier. This is another thing I think we talked about in Nimble Heart, of like when you practice something more and more times, especially if you do it consciously and with intention, what you actually do is you myelinate those sheaths of nerves, that you run some like insulation around those nerves and neurons and help them to fire together more easily. So each time that you think a certain kind of thought or you do a certain kind of action, it makes you more likely to do that same kind of thought or action in the future. And so the practice of cultivating virtue is like building a self that is moving in the direction of living in a way that's aligned with your deepest values. It goes back to that. There's an apocryphal story that I believe is often credited as being from an indigenous community in the Americas, But as so often happens with these apocryphal stories, the actual people from whom the story came is kind of obliterated, and it's just like Native American story or something. So I apologize that I don't know the more precise origin here. But it's very much like that story of the little boy who has a bad dream about a pair of wolves that are fighting one another. And there's like the good heroic wolf, and then there's like the evil wolf, and the wolves are fighting. And the little boy is really scared and goes to his grandfather and says, "Grandfather, I don't know what's going to happen. The dream ended and the wolves were still fighting, and I don't know if the good one is going to win or if the bad one is going to win." And the grandfather says to the little boy, "Well, that's because that decision is up to you. It's not preordained." And the little boy says, "Well, how do I choose? How do I like choose that I want the good one to win?" And the grandfather says, "Well, the wolf that wins will be the one that you feed." So practicing virtue is like feeding the parts of yourself that are who you want to be, who you want to become. Okay. Kayla says, the union is difficult, so the union between discipline and compassion. But it is such a good way to understand it. Discipline is the one that seems most challenging for me. Yeah. And this can go back and forth. I've gone back and forth at times in my life from one to the other. Amanda says, dog walks, river walks, deep conversations with the river. Currently protecting my local places from onslaught of fossil fuel projects just by being in place with them. I believe in that protection, or I believe that protection happens by being in place, by presence. Virtue can be practiced in volunteerism, community activism, witness. Hi, DH. He says, I wonder if this might be similar to building character versus protecting image. Yes, absolutely. I think, yes, that's a great way of characterizing this. Yeah, and Amanda says, I currently don't practice anything, not because I don't believe in its importance, but because I'm in crisis all the time and find cultivating one way impossible in time and money. Yes, okay, so I think this is a great segue, Amanda, because we all face limitations in, in our striving to become the best version of ourselves that we can be. And so I want to start with talking about some practical steps of how we can do this. And I want to challenge myself. So this goes for you, Amanda, and for everybody. I want us to leave this call or this class with everybody who's here having at least one thing that they can do. You don't have to commit to it, but that there's at least one thing that you could say yes to and you could do if you wanted. So if you haven't heard something, or if you don't feel that, if you feel that your limitations are such that these things are not possible or accessible for you, speak up and challenge me to help you find, together through conversation, that we find a way for you to enter in here. Okay. So this is what I want to propose as step one for cultivating virtue. And before we get there, I want us to think a little bit about the nature of love and self-love. Sometimes I think that self-love is given this really ooey gooey, like almost like the most like saccharine, impossible romantic comedy that like we would watch and think like, oh God, that's like not even interesting or believable. Like there's no drama. There's like no oomph. It's just so I think that self-love is, in fact, just as dynamic and nuanced and alive as any other kind of real love that you practice. And I want us to think about it with some nuance. So I think sometimes when we think about self-love, it's kind of like, well, that means I could never say anything negative to myself or criticize myself or anything like that. And while I don't want you to beat yourself up, and I don't want you to brood over your perceived flaws, believe me, that is not what I'm saying. I want you to think about the love that it takes for a friend of yours, or that it takes you when you do this for somebody else, to tell you when you have spinach in your teeth, or to tell you when something else unbecoming is going on, you know, when your behavior is unbecoming, or when like your outfit is a little bit unbecoming, not because you are ugly or you are bad or wrong, but because you need a little adjustment to how things are going in order to be your best. So I don't know about you, but in moments when I've known that I needed to tell somebody that like they had spinach in their teeth, I feel very nervous about that, you know? And I know that it takes a lot of love actually, and remembering that I would want that person to tell me, and that I would feel upset if I got home and realized that I had spinach in my teeth this whole time and my friend never told me and then let me keep going through my day, you know? So this is the spirit in which I want us to approach step one, with the kind of love and commitment to the truth that you have with a good friend, but we're going to offer it to ourselves. So step one is a clearing process. That rather than try to list virtues that we'd like to build, we're going to clear the stuff that we know we're doing that's unbecoming, the stuff we know we're doing that doesn't really align with our values or with the best of who we could be. So step one is to ask the question and write down your answer. What am I doing right now in my life that I know I shouldn't be doing? And I'm invoking habitual things here. So it's not just like, oh, today did I do one random thing that I shouldn't have done. It's more like, what are the things that I do regularly that I know are not really my best self, my most loving self, my most truthful self? So just give me a yes or a no, or if you have more to say about it, give me that. Give me a yes or a no. Do you feel like that is a doable step? Making a list of stuff that you are doing, that you just already within yourself, without having to make any, think about what a virtue is or anything, that you could just make a list of those things that if you could stop doing them, you would be making some progress to being more aligned with your values. Okay, Helen says yes. Amanda says yes. Awesome. And by the way, this process, this stop doing one anyway, this is probably my most consistent virtue practice. I do this regularly. I always have more stuff to work on. And it is very helpful cleaning up like this. Okay, all right, so far we've got yeses. I'm gonna keep going, but keep telling me your yeses and your nos. Okay. So first of all, isn't it interesting to observe how easy it is to notice inside yourself when your behavior is in conflict with your values. Like, it's easy enough that you guys very quickly were able to kind of identify, yep. Yeah, DH, it would absolutely be, it's absolutely giving voice to your conscience. Yes, absolutely. I cannot think of a better way to describe exactly what this is. Okay, so then I bet you can imagine what the next step might be. The next step is to pick one of those things and stop doing it. And there are all kinds of different strategies that you could employ to pick the thing that you're going to stop doing. One approach, if you are in a particularly tough time, you're really struggling, you don't have a lot of bandwidth, one approach would be to pick the thing that would be the easiest to stop doing, so that you could get started on making some effort toward your spiritual development, toward getting in alignment with yourself, with the least amount of kind of effort, or like the least amount of challenge, because you have that awareness from your self-compassion that you're in an already very challenging time. That would be one approach. Another approach would be to say, hey, I'm in a tough spot right now, and tough spots need big medicine. And as an offering, as if I were offering it as a sacrifice in service of the greatest possible healing, not just for myself, but for anyone who might be positively affected by this action, I am going to choose something that I acknowledge is going to be challenging, but that I believe will make a very strong impact. Something that I believe will really make a difference in how I show up in the world, in how aligned I am with my own heart. And because this is a hard time, I'm going to choose this slightly harder thing because I want this bigger medicine. There's no right or wrong way. You can think about it either way, both ways. But pick one thing. And then stop doing the thing to the best of your ability and watch to see what happens. This is the kind of thing where keeping a journal is so helpful. I don't have this quite so directly for my stop doings, but a lot of the virtue cultivation work that I have done in recent years, I can see a direct connection between some very, very positive happenings that I can see in my own life from my vantage point. I can make a direct connection between the way that I developed as a person as a result of practicing these sorts of things. Again, it's not like it was a trade or an exchange, but that in doing this, I became the person who could make the kind of contribution that I was able to make in certain situations, or that I became the kind of person who could say yes to a very good thing coming into my life, that sort of thing. And when you keep a journal of these experiences, you can start to make the links between the ways that you are developing, the ways that you're sort of shedding those behaviors that are really not true to your most authentic sense of your own heart and your own soul. As you do that, you will notice that things change for you. But it's the kind of thing that you have to write about, you have to keep track of if you want to be able to perceive it. Okay, any questions or thoughts about that clearing step? We're going to talk a little bit about, so there's like a negative and a positive approach here. So the clearing is actually the negative approach. It's saying, what am I doing that's not part of my definition of what a good person is, or that's not part of what my conscience is leading me to? Let's stop doing that. It's a negative or clearing approach. We're going to talk about a positive approach next. But I think if all that we did was clearing, it would be plenty. It would really get us very far. So, questions, thoughts, feedback. And I'll say right now, I have earlier, I got, maybe it was because I said, like, I almost used profanity in the email title, but I've gotten a lot more response to this topic. Even today, we're having more conversation in the chat than we've had previously. So I feel like maybe I'm picking up that there's some more juice or interest around this topic. And I think because of the way that it unfolds over time, it might be helpful to have some kind of an ongoing practice group or something like that devoted to this topic. So if that is something that sounds interesting to you, something that you might like to know about if it happens, or that you might like to participate in, let me know. Send me an email and just let me know that you might be interested. I'm not sure any details about it, but I feel like I'm just maybe picking up that it might be something to think about. Okay, how does the term behavioral detoxification match? I've never heard that term before. I mean, I see the resonance with it for sure. Like looking at, yeah, I like that. I mean, I don't know if there are contexts in which that term is already used or defined, or if this is something that you are inventing or sort of speaking into the world right now. But what comes up for me when I hear it is actually making the connection between where we started in the beginning with this series with the idea of poisons. And we talked a lot about the fact that poisons do not have to be physical substances. And so in fact, this step of clearing is about getting rid of the poisonous behaviors in our own life. And so that word detoxification is absolutely in the right realm. And I think it's a lot like my experience of it is that just like with detoxification in the body, like if you drink a little too much alcohol and you don't feel well the next morning, if you stop drinking alcohol, your body, all things being equal, will detoxify the rest of that alcohol and you'll feel better. And in the same way, if you stop doing the behaviors that you know are not in alignment with your heart and your soul, your being or greater being will detoxify the remaining traces of that behavior. It will move it through so it doesn't make you sick anymore, and so it doesn't make your community sick anymore. I think there's really, I think that there's a really good connection there. People underestimate the power of behavior and behavioral patterns. Yep. Yes. Because if we thought about it, if we thought about it, I think it would almost be too much for people to take in. How much of our lives are determined by what we do on autopilot. Yeah. Okay. All right. So once you feel satisfied with clearing, the next piece would be actively cultivating virtues that you choose. And there are some different approaches to this question that Helen asked of like, well, like, how do we define a virtue, or like, what is a virtue? The Wikipedia article on virtue is actually like pretty comprehensive and fairly useful. I'm going to just link it here for you guys. It lists some ways of thinking about virtue and some names of virtues from multiple civilizations and religious frameworks and philosophical traditions. So you could sort of chew on that, see what jumps out at you, see what feels relevant. But you could ask yourself the question of like, what do I believe makes someone a good person? Like when you say somebody's a good person, what do you mean by that? You could also think about, if everyone behaved in this way, what would the whole world be like? You could think about, what are the qualities that you admire in others? When you really admire someone, what are the qualities that they have that you think are admirable? And then you could do, a survey of, spiritual traditions, or, checking out that Wikipedia article and see what historically, what people have defined as virtuous, and ask yourself, which of these really feel important to you. And as you go through and look through and sort of find a couple of virtues that jump out at you, there's probably going to be some categories that they fall into. There will be the ones that you're really drawn to, that you love, that you're like, oh yes, like compassion is my jam, or whatever, courage. I love to cultivate and practice courage. Or there will be ones that you feel very deeply drawn to. And then there are going to be ones that will turn you off a little, or that you'll be like, ugh, I don't know about you. Like prudence. That sounds pretty archaic and old and like not very fun. Or temperance. That sounds like now we're in, the prohibition or something. So there will be, and some of it will be maybe just connotations of the words, or some of it may be cultural values that are out of step with your own values. And then there will be others that just don't really shine forth to you at all. That will be like really, they won't be really attractive. They won't be really aversive. They'll just be somewhere in between. What I would encourage is that you choose, once you get through the clearing step, maybe choose one virtue that you're really psyched about, that you're really drawn to, and one virtue that gives you kind of a weird, I don't know about that, kind of push away feeling. Not a feeling of like, I outright disagree with this. I don't think that that's a virtue, but more like, wow, that doesn't sound appealing, or that sounds hard, or I'm not sure that that's for me. And just start by noticing where you see behavior and thought processes from other people that line up with those virtues. So it's starting with observation, noticing. And maybe if we decide to do this in a more, I'm realizing like how many steps are involved in all of this, and I have a hard end at 8 o'clock, which is in 5 minutes. So I actually think that the clearing step, or DH's behavioral detoxification, that is so good. I think that if that is really the place to start, that is really the first thing to do. And if you feel like you have a little bit more yearning or curiosity, then you could look at some of these traditions and lists of virtues and see what you're drawn to, see what you feel that you need more of in your life, or see what you feel like you're already good at, and just start to notice them in other people. that will start to get these start to get that cultivation process going. And there's so much more, because of course each virtue will have practices and thought patterns and ways of meditating maybe, or breathing, or things that you could write about in your journal. Like each one will have different kinds of practices and thought patterns and art, music that will support and inspire the cultivation of that virtue. Because remember, what this is really about is shifting your habits of mind and heart in the direction of becoming a person for whom the easier thing to do is to behave in accordance with what you truly believe and value, so that it isn't a struggle, that it isn't about mightily resisting temptation. It's about becoming a person who is no longer tempted by the things that don't really speak to your heart. So it's kind of like neuroplasticity meets really old school spirituality, if I had to sum up today's talk. XO1 Wes, welcome. This channel is about herbal medicine, healing, deep conversations, meaning, dreams, Chinese medicine, everything awesome, basically. All the things that I am obsessed with. That's what this channel is about. Always subject to change, because why not? Okay. I have 2 minutes. Questions, thoughts, feedback, enthusiastic pledges to go forth and play with any of these things. I welcome all of this. Amanda says that was just the tip of the iceberg. Yep, it really was. It really was. Kayla says, I will go forth and play. Thank you for this experience. Awesome. Helen says, I'm realizing I often jump to the positive process without doing any clearing. I think I'll start to focus on the clearing. Yeah. Having that simple act of clearing first. Yes, it's so helpful. And it's so good too, because you can really come directly from what you already know is right in your heart. We do know that. We feel the difference. We feel it strengthen us when we act in accordance with our heart, and we feel it weaken us when we behave in a way that isn't. Reminded a lot with behavioralism. B.F. Skinner's work might be useful to consider. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool, because of the I have some aversion to behaviorism in my own self, but you're right. There are some parallels here. There are some pieces that relate, and it's a good reminder to me that there are nuggets and jewels within the things that I sort of push away from as well. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. All right, my darlings, thank you so much for being here as always. And next week, we're still in this sort of wounded healer month. So next week, we're talking about kind of how not to be a hungry ghost. The idea is, it's going to go along a lot with this idea of clearing, and it's really about how to empty ourselves, how to be empty, and how to let go of the false promises that seduce us into thinking that they will make us feel better, when really they don't make us feel better. They just make us get hungrier and hungrier and more and more lonely and forlorn, and in need of true nourishment. So it'll be a little bit more, I think, relating to some of this clearing stuff that we talked about today. Okay. All right, everybody. Have a beautiful, beautiful week, and I will hope to see you again next time.